Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm your host, Ali Ingersoll. Over the last 2 decades, gangs have reportedly grown in the South. Some law enforcement members link hundreds of crimes to them. It's why our latest WRAL documentary digs into the topic. Today, producer and reporter Cristin Severance is here to join me to talk about her latest investigation. Thanks so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So, right off the top, do we have gangs in North Carolina?
Yes, absolutely. Anyone in law enforcement will tell you that. The experts I spoke with for the documentary told me at least 50 gangs are in Raleigh and hundreds more across the state. The FBI reports at least 8,000 gang members in North Carolina. Now, the data we have on this is on the lower side for a variety of reasons. So different agencies will keep track of gang members in different ways. Some use this statewide system called GangNet, but not all agencies. So really, the takeaway here, many of the people I interviewed tell me that the real number is much higher.
And how do we know that there are gangs here? Are there signs, ways to identify that they're in the area? And I guess a more broad question, what exactly is the definition of a gang?
I learned so much doing this, and that's kind of how I start off the documentary. What is the definition of a gang? And in North Carolina, the definition is 3 or more people with the same common beliefs working in concert to commit crimes. And, some told me that it's not illegal to be in a gang. The issue comes with that last part of the definition. It's when gangs commit crimes to make money. And in terms of what gangs are here, there are so many. I interviewed a retired gang detective who listed, Bloods, Crips, Latin Kings, Gangster Disciples, Satan Disciples. There are so many different gangs and subsets, and they really can be found all over the state.
When we're saying all over the state, does that mean in rural communities too, or are gangs just a city issue?
Gangs are really everywhere. We spent a good amount of time working on this documentary being in Nash County and Edgecombe County, talking with law enforcement there. We went along with SWAT team members as they arrested gang members. We interviewed gang members, in these rural counties about why they joined a gang and really their regrets in joining the gang. So absolutely not just a city issue. You can find them everywhere.
What sort of criminal activities are they linked to here, not only in Raleigh, but I guess everywhere then? Is it different also geographically, what kind of things they're getting into?
It varies, but it's anything to make money for that gang. Robberies, fraud. Some gangs may sell drugs. And then with that criminal activity comes shootings and some of the other, violent crimes.
And what exactly does the data tell us about crime and violent crime in our area, and how is that linked to the gang activity?
So not all violent crimes are linked to gangs, of course, but the violent crime numbers, that issue came up a lot in my interview with Raleigh's police chief, Estella Patterson. So while many of the advocates and gang members and other law enforcement experts I interviewed said, without a doubt, gangs are absolutely a problem in Raleigh and North Carolina, Chief Patterson was more careful with her words. She doesn't like to say emphatically gangs are a problem in Raleigh. And, as a member of the media, this is not new. She does not talk about gangs a lot. In doing my research, I watched many of her speeches and briefings and, just her being in public. She really does not bring up gangs a lot. She has to be asked about it. And when she is asked about it, she is very careful with her words. And so we really get into that in the documentary. Why won't she say gangs are a problem? And it's not that she doesn't want to. She does have a reasoning, and she says it's tied to these violent crime numbers. And, she says when you base it on other cities, even peer cities, the same size as Raleigh, she does not believe that the gang problem here are as great as these other cities. And, Ali, you really helped me with this. You pulled the data and you pulled these numbers for me, and we found that, she was right. Raleigh does have a low violent crime rate, especially, when you compare it to cities with the same population. And we can go over those numbers now. And I also do want people to really, watch the documentary, but we can also go over them now.
Yeah, when I was pulling that data, I thought that was so interesting. I remember Oakland, obviously, is this historic city where you think about a good amount of violence, and then pulling the data to really, I guess, echo that anecdotal story, the stories that we hear, right? It was just so fascinating to me. Yeah, as you said, I pulled the data, but yeah, if you want to talk more about it, that'd be great, and how you kind of bring it up in the documentary.
Yeah, so it's really, look, as an investigative journalist, I'm not going to just let, especially a public official, paid for by taxpayer dollars, just say broad statements, right? Like, you do need to know the metric in which they are measuring this. And that's always my goal when I have these, interviews. And so when someone says, well, gangs really aren't that a problem compared to these other cities, of course, we're going to pull the numbers. And so we looked at, the crime rates for the 10 cities about the same size as ours. So a population of, around 425 to 515,000 people. And Ali, you pulled for Kansas City, Minneapolis, Virginia Beach. And Raleigh's crime rate does fall towards the bottom. So it's less than 500 violent crimes per every 100,000 people. And as you mentioned, Oakland, smaller in size, but the crime rate is 3 times the size of Raleigh's. And I think that's what's so valuable with these documentaries. We have the time to really sit down with someone, get into this interview, pull the numbers and look, and it does make sense now. Okay, she's saying gangs are here, but just not as huge of a problem as these other cities.
What other kinds of trends are we seeing with gangs?
I would say, the most interesting trend was really with how gangs are using this North Carolina law to convince young people to commit crimes. So I don't think it's anything new that gangs target younger people, but in all of my reporting across the country, I've yet to hear of a gang member using a law change to really convince young people to join a gang or use it as a recruitment tool. And, we heard this from county, state, and federal officials, young people being told, you hold the gun, you commit this crime, and, you commit this crime, you won't get in trouble. And that's just not true. They are getting into trouble. And we get into that extensively in the documentary.
And after this break, we will too. Welcome back. So, Cristin, from my reporting and yours, we know that the juvenile detention facilities are over capacity at this point. And as you were mentioning, that really has to do with a change to the law. And people who you spoke with and who I've talked to, they say that that has a direct connection to gangs too. You kind of just touched on this, but can you elaborate more on all of that? What is the law change and how does this impact gangs?
Absolutely. So most of the people we interviewed talked about this. It was the raise the age law. This is the law that stopped 16 and 17-year-olds from automatically being charged as adults in North Carolina, except for violent crimes. And this was long overdue. It happened in 2019. North Carolina was the last state to make the change. And so the issue is not with the law itself, because many people believe that should have happened. But the issue is with how law enforcement officials say gangs are using it. So people are hearing, oh, the age was raised, and they're thinking, oh, there's no accountability. Again, gang members are saying, hey, you do this crime, you will not be held accountable. And the numbers are showing it. I mean, in 2019, juveniles committed 978 violent crimes in North Carolina. In 2022, the number more than doubled to over 2,300 violent crimes. And, many people tie it back to this law change. And so there are a lot of discussions right now. There's been legislation proposed, House Bill 834, that would automatically send 16 and 17-year-olds who commit violent offenses to adult court instead of starting in juvenile court. That passed the Senate with, broad bipartisan support, and it's actually supposed to be voted on today, Wednesday. And so this is very timely. And, some people are opposed. They don't think, they still want 16, 17-year-olds to start in juvenile court, but others are saying, look, the numbers are there. And if they commit these violent crimes, they should go straight to adult court.
Wow, that's really interesting that this law has, which we thought, and it does for the most part, do good, right? But
yes.
People have learned how to use it in a way that has had negative impacts on society and on our community.
Absolutely. And yes. And the law was supposed to help young people, but it's now being used to exploit them in some cases.
So you had a chance to talk with people who were former gang members. And I just think that is so interesting that you had this opportunity to sit down and speak with them. What exactly did they tell you about this lifestyle?
This was the most interesting part of the entire documentary. And, they're not former. I mean, that's the thing I learned. Once you're in a gang, you really are not out, especially as one gang member told me, you tattoo it on yourself and on your face. So it's really hard once you make that decision to leave that lifestyle. Some gang members are not as active or they don't commit crimes now, but there really is no such thing as a former gang member. And they joined for two different reasons. One, joined when he was in juvenile detention. It was a very violent facility, and he joined, he said, basically because there were fights every day. And then when he got out of that detention center, and this happens a lot when people join in jail or prison, he got out and then he stayed in the gang. The other gang member I interviewed joined as a teenager. He thought it was like a family, a brotherhood, and spent years in this life. And he said his moment of stopping was when he realized his closest friends were all dead or in doing life in prison. And it was so eye-opening to talk with them about why they joined and their regrets. And I learned a lot, and I'm sure anyone watching will too.
Yeah, that is what I really look forward to watching this story. But there were a number of other people who you spoke with, and I feel like there were so many voices in this. So many people wanted to talk with you about this topic. Who were some of the other people, and what were some of the conversations that really stood out?
Sheriff Clee Atkinson in Edgecombe County was so open in talking about this, and he really believes mentoring is the answer. Okay, so he has incredible relationships with gang members, and that is not rare. There are, many people in law enforcement who have these friendships with gang members, and they do try to mentor them and show them that there's another way. And we talked to a retired gang detective. We talked to advocates, trying to reach kids early. U.S. Attorney Michael Easley and William Laster with the Division of Juvenile Justice. All of these people were so open about this problem, and I really learned a lot. It's one of the most interesting ones we've done.
What are you hoping that people learn from watching this?
I hope people have a better understanding of gangs and why kids join them, and how this law that was meant to help kids is hurting some of them.
Well, thank you so much, Cristin, for joining me today. The documentary airs Thursday at 7:30 on WRAL or WRALdoc.com. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. If you listen to this podcast on WRAL.com or the WRAL News app, you can also find it in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere that you can find podcasts. Follow the show so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for listening.